Hello everyone and welcome back to Hollywood Remembers. Today we pause to honor some of the American icons we've lost recently, along with other cherished souls whose journeys touched people far and wide. If this resonates with you, a like would mean a great deal. It helps us keep creating these tributes with the sincerity and dignity they deserve. Thank you for being here. Let's honor their memories together. Daryl George Crofts left us at the age of 87. Some might need a moment with that name, but the instant that melody reaches your ears, everything clicks. One half of Seals and Crofts. A sound that never fought for attention in a crowded musical era. It simply rose above it. The news of his passing came without fanfare, and somehow that feels right. Crofts was never someone who demanded the spotlight. He never had to be. In those early 70s days when AM radio was the pulse of everyday life, their music had a way of slipping through the cracks and settling in. Summer breeze drifting through screen doors. Diamond Girl arriving just as the evening sky began to warm. Nothing theatrical, nothing forced, just present. And if you were alive in those years, what you carry isn't the chart position. It's the feeling. Long before any of that, he was behind a drum kit. That was the beginning. A chance meeting with Jim Seals when both were still young and uncertain, years before the fame and the gold records. Two musicians crafting something that resisted easy categorization. And perhaps that's exactly why it endured. Away from the stage, Crofts remained rooted. His family was his anchor. His faith gave him direction. He knew when to step away, even as the music industry thundered on without slowing. That kind of self-awareness is uncommon. And listening to those songs today carries a different weight. Not grief exactly, more like a gentle ache, as though something familiar has drifted just slightly out of reach, even though it hasn't gone anywhere at all. John Michael Ozzy Osbourne has died at 76. And that news settles differently, because whether heavy metal was your world or not, you knew who he was. You knew that voice. Raw, almost spectral, bursting through the radio in the early 70s unlike anything before it. His passing came after years of health battles that played out largely in public view. Ozzy never really lived behind closed doors. The beautiful moments and the broken ones both found their way out. When Black Sabbath first emerged from Birmingham in the early 70s, the music felt like something new had torn through the atmosphere. Not simply loud, but dense, slow-moving, carrying a kind of dread that hadn't existed in pop music before. Songs like Paranoid and Iron Man didn't just fill a room. They occupied it. For a generation watching the Vietnam War unfold on television, watching industries collapse and certainties crumble, that sound resonated in a way that was almost instinctual. But Ozzy was never just a voice or an image. He was disorganized and endearing. Hilarious in ways he didn't always intend. Someone who fell apart repeatedly and somehow reassembled himself each time. The reality television years peeled back the curtain on something unexpected. Not the Prince of Darkness, but an ordinary man, a devoted if chaotic husband and father, baffled by everyday technology. That contrast never left people. Beneath all the theater, there was a genuine fragility he never quite managed to conceal, even when it would have served him better to do so. And now, in his absence, there's something strange about it. Artists like him don't feel bound to a particular decade. They simply become part of the ongoing fabric of your life, quietly present, until one day they're not, and you suddenly realize just how long they'd been there. Joseph Allen McDonald, better known as Country Joe, passed away at 84. For most people, that name pulls you immediately to a single moment. Not an album, not a polished single, but a stage, a vast crowd, and a voice slicing clean through the chaos of Woodstock. His passing was confirmed following a life that never once tried to separate music from meaning. He wasn't simply performing. He was embedded in history as it unfolded around him. Late 60s America, protests filling the streets, television screens showing things people weren't sure how to process. And then that chant. Blunt, uncomfortable, unforgettable. The "I feel like I'm fixin' to die" rag. There was no nuance in it, and it wasn't designed to have any. Whether you stood with him or against him, nobody walked away confused about his message. Before Woodstock, he had already built a body of work with Country Joe and the Fish. Psychedelic, restless, deliberately imperfect in the most compelling way. Music that refused to stay in one place. Off the stage, he remained engaged and outspoken, politically active and occasionally difficult. He held on to those same convictions long after the culture moved on and found other things to argue about. That kind of consistency is genuinely rare. Returning to those recordings today, that Woodstock performance in particular, it hits differently now. The urgency is preserved, but the years have worn away enough of the surface to let you glimpse what was underneath. Not just a protest, but a person. And that leaves you wondering how many voices of that caliber are still reverberating somewhere, even long after the crowd has emptied out. There is an unremarkable house in Pontypridd, South Wales. The sort of place your eyes pass over without registering. Nothing in its appearance suggests it was the starting point for anything significant. But it was. That is where Tom Jones began, though he wasn't Tom Jones yet. He was Thomas Woodward. Born June 7, 1940. His father descended into the coal mines each day, carrying the weight of that labor home in his body long after his shift ended. His mother bore her own quiet burdens, less visible but no less heavy. And young Thomas had no grand ambitions. No visions of stages or audiences. He was simply a child. Then, at 12, life stopped moving. Tuberculosis. It didn't announce itself dramatically. It arrived slowly and then kept him bedridden for months. The same ceiling every day. Light filtering in around half-drawn curtains. And the world outside continuing without him. Voices, footsteps, life happening just beyond the walls. When that isolation stretches long enough, something inside you reorganizes. You begin noticing things you previously ignored. The texture of a voice on a record. Small melodic choices most listeners never register. And at some point, almost without deciding to, you try it yourself. Not out of ambition. Not with any particular goal. Simply because you need something to do with the silence. That's where it started. No plan, no audience, just a sick kid filling a quiet room. And when he sang, something in the room shifted. It's difficult to articulate precisely. His voice didn't sound age-appropriate. It didn't even feel like it belonged in that house. It was too expansive, too grounded, almost wrong in the best possible way. But none of that mattered yet. Once he recovered, life accelerated. At 16 he left school, which wasn't unusual for his time and place. That same year he married Linda. Both of them young. Probably too young, if honesty is applied. By 17, he was a father. And that reality reshapes you whether you're ready or not. Responsibility arrived before maturity fully could. So he worked wherever work was available. Factories. Construction sites. His hands occupied while his mind drifted elsewhere. Because evenings brought him back to music. Small clubs with low ceilings and heavy smoke. Rooms where people came to drink and talk, not to listen. Most nights he was sonic wallpaper. But occasionally, something different happened. A head would turn. Just one, sometimes two. And you could read the expression clearly. A slight disorientation. That voice emerging from that person didn't compute. The disconnect between how he appeared and how he sounded created a pull that attention couldn't quite resist. He was unpolished. More volume than finesse at times. Rough where he should have been smooth. But there was an authenticity in it that no amount of training can manufacture. That's the thing audiences respond to even when they can't name it. Nothing transformed overnight. There was no single moment of ignition. Just consistency, night after repetitive night, and the slow accumulation of something that hadn't yet revealed its shape. Not fame, not even recognition. Something more like the early formation of a path. Already laid, just not yet illuminated. And once that kind of momentum finds its footing, it doesn't wait for your permission. In 1964, Gordon Mills entered the picture. Manager is the official title, but it falls short of what he actually was. He identified something before anyone else had thought to look for it. Not only the voice. Plenty of people had ears enough to notice that. Something more elusive. The way Tom commanded a room without appearing to try. Or perhaps the fact that he hadn't yet fully grasped what he possessed, which gave him a quality no one could have coached into him. Mills moved quickly. The name had to go. Thomas Woodward became Tom Jones. Sharper, more memorable. Something that stuck after a single introduction. And momentum began building. Then came 1965 and it's not unusual. Today the song feels woven into the fabric of things, like it was always there. But that first time it broke through radio static, it didn't dissolve into the background. It demanded notice. The voice didn't glide over the arrangement. It pushed into it with a kind of controlled urgency that felt entirely unmanufactured. People responded immediately, not gradually. Number 1 in the UK. And just like that, the scale of everything changed. Larger venues, brighter production, cameras pointed at him, expectations multiplying. And with increased visibility came intensity. Crowds responding with a volume and physicality that surprised even seasoned observers. Women rushing the stage, clothing pulled apart mid-performance. That became the dominant image, and it traveled everywhere he went. It was effective, but it also flattened him. Because beneath the spectacle, there was a craftsman at work. Someone who understood precisely how far to extend himself before pulling back. How to hold an audience on the edge without letting them fall. That calibration doesn't develop accidentally. By 1966, What's New Pussycat had saturated everything. Inescapable, almost exhaustingly so. But then something changed direction. Green grass of home arrived slower, carrying more gravity. It landed in a different part of the listener. Not the adrenaline response, something more interior, closer to recognition. Suddenly he wasn't just a performer delivering energy. He was conveying something. And that distinction shifted how audiences understood him. Then Delilah in 1969. By that stage, success had graduated into something more durable. A cultural presence rather than a chart position. The kind that doesn't require maintenance because it's already embedded. But concurrent with all of that public assent, something less visible was also in motion. The relentless pace of touring. The blur of airports and identical hotel rooms. Days dissolving into one another. And back in Wales, a family living a life that moved at an entirely different speed, waiting in the spaces his absence created. That tension doesn't resolve cleanly. Success has a forward momentum that doesn't pause to ask what it's leaving behind. So he kept moving. Show following show, city following city. Because even a brief pause might have destabilized what had taken so long to construct. And that was a risk he wasn't prepared to accept. Fame doesn't simply evaporate. That's a misconception most people hold. It doesn't vanish. It undergoes a gradual metamorphosis. And when you're at the center of it, you feel every incremental change. For Tom, the 1980s didn't arrive as a collapse. It was subtler. The hits didn't cease, they thinned out. The spotlight didn't extinguish, it narrowed. Initially that feels like breathing room. The pressure easing slightly. But sustained long enough, that quieter atmosphere starts generating its own discomfort. Years of being watched, of being expected to deliver, create a strange vacuum when that intensity softens. Not crisis. More like the odd awareness of a room where fewer people are paying attention. He kept showing up. Touring, recording, fulfilling commitments. Nothing from the outside suggested any kind of trouble. But internally, the scaffolding was shifting. The image that had propelled him was starting to feel external, something constructed around him that he now had an obligation to sustain rather than something that naturally emerged from him. Then came 1988. Not a reinvention in the dramatic sense, more of a pivot. Kiss, originally recorded by Prince. On paper, the pairing sounds unlikely. But in execution, something clicked. There was an ease to it, a self-awareness that suggested he understood precisely how people perceived him and had quietly decided he didn't need to be imprisoned by that perception any longer. It didn't read as an attempt to reclaim relevance. And paradoxically, that's why it felt relevant. People took notice again, though differently from before. Not the electric excitement of a young voice commanding a new audience. Something more considered. Recognition of someone who had navigated decades and come out the other side with their perspective intact. Reinvention, the real kind, doesn't look like what people imagine. It isn't triumphant or sudden. It's the uncomfortable act of releasing what previously worked, stepping into territory without guaranteed footing, and accepting the possibility of being fundamentally misread. That requires a particular kind of composure. More years accumulated. The noise shifted and changed character. New chapters opened. And then April 10, 2016. Linda. Gone. There's no elegant way to approach that. 59 years of marriage. Together before any of the fame existed, before the world had any particular opinion about either of them. When a partnership of that length ends, it doesn't shatter. It creates a permanent absence that settles into the architecture of daily life. He didn't choreograph his grief for public consumption. When he spoke about it, his words were plain and unadorned, the language of someone still in the process of absorbing something they hadn't finished understanding. And afterward, something in him was visibly different, though not in any dramatic way. The voice remained. The skill was intact. But the particular tension he'd always carried, that constant forward pressure, had eased. As though he'd stopped needing to hold quite so many things together simultaneously. Grief doesn't suspend your life. It doesn't grant you permission to stop. You continue, you work, you honor your commitments. But you carry the weight differently. It shows up in silences, in unguarded moments, in the way certain things that once mattered simply no longer register with the same urgency. Tom Jones is in his 80s now, and he is still present. Not in the same configuration, and he isn't attempting to be. That much is immediately apparent. The drive to prove continued relevance seems to have left him entirely. He belongs, and he appears to know it without requiring confirmation. You see it in the way he occupies his chair on The Voice UK. Patient, observant, not filling every silence. Not competing for attention. And when he does speak, it carries weight. Not because the words are crafted for effect, but because they're coming from somewhere earned. There is no performance anxiety behind them. No subtext of needing to impress. That changes the entire quality of how you receive him. Because somewhere along the way he stopped orienting himself around being impressive and started simply being truthful. That transition is quiet but unmistakable once you notice it. The voice has changed, of course. How could it not? You know it the instant you hear it, but it isn't the same instrument it was on those early recordings. He makes no effort to suggest otherwise. Certain edges have softened. There are moments where it gives slightly, just briefly. And rather than concealing those moments, he allows them to remain. That's a significant departure from the earlier version of himself, for whom control was paramount. Power and precision above everything. What exists now is different. Less force behind it, but more meaning in it. As though each note is carrying accumulated experience rather than just technical execution. And listeners feel that and lean in accordingly. Not out of nostalgic excitement, but out of something more attentive. He still performs the songs people have carried for decades. But they arrive differently now. Not necessarily slower in tempo, but slower in some less definable quality. As though he isn't simply recalling them but moving through them again with full awareness of everything that has happened since he first sang them. The audiences who have been present from the beginning understand this intuitively, because they're doing the same thing. They've buried people. They've changed in ways they didn't anticipate and stayed in other ways they didn't expect. So when they look at him now, they aren't only seeing a performer. They're seeing a reflection of their own persistence. Someone who didn't disappear when circumstances became less accommodating. Who didn't calcify into a nostalgic artifact of his own peak years. He kept adjusting, however imperceptibly, and that matters enormously because most people don't. Most people grip too tightly. They resist the evolution and end up feeling like echoes of themselves. He avoided that, at least in the ways that count. There are small moments now, easy to miss, where something in the voice gives way briefly. And instead of recovering immediately, he lets it sit. Just for a breath. Not as a dramatic gesture. Simply as acceptance. As though he has stopped being afraid of being perceived as diminished and discovered that the alternative, being heard exactly as he is more powerful than anything calculated precision could achieve. For the people watching, this carries a meaning they don't always articulate directly. They understand it because they are living it too. Time moved without asking anyone's consent. And here they are, still standing. So when he takes the stage now, there is no remaining tension in it. No performance architecture holding everything upright. Just a man who has arrived at a clear understanding of where he stands and has no particular interest in standing anywhere else. There's a kind of quiet authority in that. Unforced and undramatic. In an era that rewards relentless acceleration, that quality has become genuinely rare. Perhaps even reassuring. Because he didn't fade. He didn't retreat when the volume dropped around him. He simply recalibrated, gradually, without announcement. And if you listen now with real attention, you understand that technical perfection stopped being the point quite some time ago. What you're hearing instead is everything the years deposited in him. Everything endured, everything absorbed, everything that persisted through all the change. And perhaps that's the real source of what audiences are responding to today. Not the legend in its original form. Not the voice at its most commanding. But the version that remained. Still upright. Still present. Still standing on that stage, only carrying everything it took to get there.